Welcome to In Pursuit of Truth. This is your host, Sir Patrick Mack. You are listening to the dopest truther MC this side of the, I don't know. I'm back. I'm sort of back. I'm having like a soft, grand reopening a little bit, so things might sound a little different today. Just bear with me. But today I'm taking you back, to the city of Detroit, Rock City. So get up. First things first, everybody gotta move their feet on over here to Detroit Evergreen from the 6. If you've not seen this video, I highly suggest that you do because it's essentially part 1, and today's video is part 2. It's like Detroit Evergreen, part 2, Return of the Jedi. Except I don't have Ewoks. I don't have a budget for Ewoks, and I don't think they'd be necessary in this video. But what we talk about in this video is a couple house explosions, this neighborhood of near downtown Detroit, the history with the nearby mines, underground tunnels, all kinds of corruption, the largest Masonic temple in the world. A lot of this will be precursory for what we're going to talk about today. And the reason why I am doing a part 2 is because A, I wasn't finished telling you the story. There was a lot more there and a lot more things that I thought were very relevant. And B, because a lot of you have shared some interesting things that I would also like to pass along to you. That being said, if you are not a fan of my Googly Maps videos, I'm letting you know right now, there will be googly. Oh, there will be googly. So, if you're not a fan, it's all good. But this might be your bus stop, lest you complain about it later, only to garner no sympathy. Let's go. Let's take you back to the original incident that sparked my attention in the first place. That was an explosion at 14400 Evergreen Road. Now, this appears to be low-income housing, as you can kind of see in the picture there. And we're not going to rehash a bunch of this. I just want to memorize you of the incident. And this is not our first explosion on this road alone. As a matter of fact, Evergreen Road had a previous explosion about a year prior. And again, we talked about that in the previous video. Both of these seem to be attributed to faulty gas lines. And I want to stop right there and just clarify that I have really no problem with that explanation, especially in this kind of housing, and especially if these were happening, which they both seem to, maybe have been happening during colder weather. So, faulty gas lines can be very, very dangerous. I think a lot of you have probably experienced it yourself, and all it takes is a spark, and all of a sudden you've got yourself a problem. So an exploding house does not necessarily mean that satellites are shooting these things out of the sky, particularly in neighborhoods like this. However, there are some curious consistencies that I see with some other stories that I found in this one, which is why I'm revisiting this story in the first place. But a first thing that I want to point out were the curious numbers, the 14400 Evergreen Road. Now, we've talked a great deal on this channel about many different possibilities that Evergreen references are to. But I think there's kind of a general concept, and then I think a lot of people constantly go back to the word evergreen if they're kind of consistent with these concepts and beliefs. These things are things that have been part of our society for a long time. The 14400, a lot of you emailed me and messaged me about that, and I tend to find it curious too. Could this be a reference to the 144,000 mentioned in the book of Revelations? I don't know, but what we do know is that we've seen a lot of communications with these incidents, and there was something more about this particular incident that I also thought was another communication, and it was in regards to a missing character, and that missing character just so happens to be a dog. That's right, this is from WESH.com. Detroit. A dog pulled from the rubble of a home explosion in Detroit that sent 6 people to the hospital is expected to recover. Members of the Detroit Pit Crew Dog Rescue have named the dog Miracle until they can get in touch with the family displaced by the explosion Saturday night. Now, it mentioned 6 people. They went to the hospital with 2nd or 3rd degree burns. That's what we talked about in the previous story. But that article didn't mention the dog. Teresa Sumter, director of the Detroit Pit Crew Dog Rescue, told WXYZ that first responders were determined to rescue the dog. There was a ton of people just trying to dig her out from underneath the debris, Sumter said. It was very intense. Sumter was live on Facebook for part of the 45 last-minute dig to rescue the dog. People were just literally throwing bricks off of her, she said. I saw people picking up a microwave and getting it off her. There was shingles. There was anything that would come off a house, siding. All of that was on top of her. At a certain point, they found a chain, and they started pulling the chain, and it led to her. The dog was ultimately found alive and responsive, happy to see people. She was then taken to a local animal hospital for evaluation. Staff there said the dog had some broken bones near her pelvis and hip, but those injuries should heal without surgery. Fire officials say the explosion was related to, again, natural gas. Okay, so it sounds like a very believable story, and it probably is. But like I said, these stories were very curious, and if you follow my channel for a while, not only have we seen a lot of exploding houses, but we've seen number of references to dogs, dog tweets, dog videos, dog commercials, dog being mentioned or put in the backgrounds of videos. We've seen dogs incessantly, and we've been covering this for nearly 2 years. Now let me show you a couple of other things in relation to dogs and explosions. Our madness begins in Tampa. August 20th, 2017, home explosion kills 13 dogs, sends one person to the hospital. Or how about Zeus in Cleveland? We talked about this guy before. Dog survives East Cleveland house explosion. The pooch was in the house right next to the home that exploded. Zeus is okay. He's a little shook up. The explosion happened around 12:45. Or how about as recent as August 23rd, 2019, Rochester, New York, missing dog from house explosion found safe. September 5th, 2018, Taylor, Pennsylvania, Taylor house explosion, owner's dog returns. Here's another one from November 18th, 2019, very recent from Cattaraugus County. That's about as upstate New York sounding as it gets. Another potential gas leak. A dog survived after being ejected out of a house that exploded in Cattaraugus County on Monday. And here is another one from Holt, Michigan. Ginger, a dog that went missing due to a home explosion, has been found. So there was a happy ending on that one. And here's one from Cleveland. Vermilion family escapes minutes before house explodes from January 31st, 2019. Not long ago. All right, so I don't want to bore you with a dogtage, but over the past couple of years, we've established a few things. That we've seen a lot of curious stories involving the use of dogs in the narrative. Now, whether the actual story happens and there's another story embedded in it, or whether it's a fake story, it's always kind of hard to tell, but a lot of them are very, very curious. We've also had a lot of mystery explosions, some of them as of recent involving dogs, but not just dogs, curious stories that happen to involve a dog. We've covered a couple of these. Like I mentioned, Zeus was one of them. I'm not going to rehash them. I just want to kind of rememberize you that we've had a multitude of them. We've also had some mystery house explosions in more upscale neighborhoods that just didn't seem right either, where it almost seemed like it was sort of this controlled explosion. Gas explosions can happen anywhere, and I understand that, but we've had a lot of mystery ones, and I just want to kind of keep this sort of in your brain, if you will. Now, I want to go back to this neighborhood because that's really what I want to touch upon. I also showed in the previous video that 14400 Evergreen Road was 11.6 miles, I guess depending on which way you go, to the nearest Planned Parenthood. And although that itself I don't believe to be connected, I do think the fact that the Planned Parenthood finds their way into these lower income neighborhoods is most certainly by design. Now, I also showed you how that same Planned Parenthood was in very close proximity, 1.2 miles away from right here, if you see on the left center side of your screen, the Perry Funeral Home. And this was the place that was found with a bunch of aborted fetuses that were, not only were they aborted fetuses, but they had not been preserved correctly. It was a very creepy situation, and there were dozens. Some of them had actually been stored in this secret place in the ceiling. So it was a very creepy story, and again, dangerously close to Planned Parenthood. And then, of course, there is the other connection in which I've talked about in multiple videos regarding Planned Parenthood and their sale of baby parts and how they've actually been connected sometimes with FedEx, which is why I also look for the FedEx locations. And as you can see, you have one here in under a mile and this one in just under 2. Okay, so I know I'm rehashing last video a little bit, but it's important to remember some of this stuff because we get a lot of newer viewers. And I'm trying to make a bigger picture here that the lay of the land is very important. It may apply in your own city. But in the last video, of course, we also talked about this Masonic temple right here. And this is where I want to pick up today. This is not just a Masonic temple. It is the largest Masonic temple in the world. Seems rather significant. And it sits kind of in the ghetto. We're going to actually go down to Street View in a minute and take a look. But it's a really disgusting neighborhood. And of course, you have all these other influential buildings right near here. Little Caesars Arena, Ford Field, Comerica Park. These are massive structures. And of course, we don't really have any good infrastructure right in this area. So even though you could argue that bringing these sports teams brings a whole bunch of revenue to these territories, we can see even visually that it does not, because right outside, you've got all this low-income housing. This low-income housing generally, is a place where we're going to have broken homes, split up families, drug use, whatnot. I know I'm generalizing a lot, but of course, this creates a lot of disaffected youth, and that's where these family planning centers come in, Planned Parenthood, and they are reaping the rewards off of whether it's unwanted children and things like this. And of course, this is also where we see a lot of these strange feeder schools that tend to get a lot of government funding. We talked about this one right here, Cass Technical High School. There was a situation on the Ellen TV show where she donated to an area school only to find out that the principal was funneling that money. Through that process, we realized that Cass Technical High School was one of these. But this is another place that gets a ton of government funding. And again, probably is another feeder program for a lot of these youths, whether they go into acting or whether they go into modeling or whether they go into some sort of human trafficking or not. They seem to grow up kind of in this system and everything seems to be set around them. And that is why we googly. Now, I also pointed out there were massive tunnels underneath here. We know there are massive tunnels built under the Masonic Temple. We know that there are mines below Detroit. And I also know that that's not abnormal. However, it is relevant. Massive tunnels connecting the entire city. And that's an important thing to know. And like I just said, they bring a lot of revenue in town here. But here we've got this virtual ghetto right here. There's nothing around here. So it doesn't seem like this neighborhood is prospering. Now I want to take you down to this little area right here, Mariners Inn. And here it is from our man on the street. Brought to you by Serco. Mariners Inn. This is shelter and services for the homeless. And it appears to be these 3 buildings here. This looks to be sort of their community center or their meeting center. And this, I would imagine, is their offices, an agency of the Episcopal Church. And then over here is their residence. Looks like a pretty nice building that they actually did up. But a few red flags went up. First of all, let me take you over here so you can get a look at the facade. Kind of looks like a Harry Potter school, doesn't it, with their little coat of arms there. Got the little, what is that, a butterfly? I don't know what that is. I don't know. Anyway, look up here. What do you see up here? Does this look familiar? I'm just saying. Anyway, pretty sweet place, and I don't want to necessarily disparage anything like this, but I don't see a Home Depot around here. I don't see a coffee bean around here. There's not a lot around here other than businesses. It's pretty much just slum. And we'll take a look at a little bit more of that right here. But there's not much here other than creep and crime. But there it is, Mariners Inn. Well, if the Mariners Inn does not sound familiar to you, you are not alone. But you may remember this story from July of 2018, where Ben Carson basically tells Detroit homeless shelter to get off his back and stop asking for federal money. Rude! Ben Carson's stint as Secretary of Housing and Urban Development has been packed with displays of his inhumanity, from a proposal to triple the rents for people in subsidized housing to countless lawsuits to telling a woman she needs to get married to get out of poverty. All right, well, that wasn't accurate. They were just saying that married couples generally tend to not be as poor. Carson is a heartless disaster. He continued his soulless ways with a visit to a homeless shelter in his hometown of Detroit, Rock City. During the Obama years, homelessness in Detroit went down nearly 20%. But now under the Trump administration, and with the threat of funding being slashed for social programs, homelessness could peak, which is why shelters like the Mariners Inn in Detroit need federal funding. There's our Mariners Inn. So yeah, he indeed visited Mariners Inn because it receives HUD money, and they're asking for more federal money because their budget has already been slashed, according to Karina Jackson, Mariners Chief Operating Officer. Okay, so the reason why I started you off over here, we're on News 1, is because I wanted to show you what the narrative was talking about. And of course, this was at the time, let me bring you down here. Clearly, Carson does not know it is his job as Secretary of Housing and Urban Development to fight for federal funding. And no, his job is to develop housing and urban development, not necessarily to fight for federal funding. Not arrive at a homeless shelter and say, sorry, can't help you, especially when Trump plans to spend millions of dollars on a military parade. Okay, so that was the narrative, right? Well, what Ben Carson really said was that there was money in the private sector. He said the government can't afford to help because they have to spend money on the military, and he told them to dig into the private sector. Okay, it wasn't really a lie, and it sounded pretty cold to them, right? Well, let me take you over here to the Detroit Free Press, and this article was from the very same time. Detroit Housing and Urban Development Secretary Ben Carson visited a shelter and substance abuse treatment center for homeless men Thursday, says it lost some $400,000 in federal funding. Well, that is quite a bit of coin, right? Let me take you down right here. Mariners Inn currently receives $268,000 annually in HUD funding. That's HUD funding. I'm not sure if that's all their federal funding. It's hard to really know. But let's just say that they're receiving $268,000 in HUD, and before they had lost their $400,000. So we at least know that at some point they were making at least $668,000 a year in federal funding. Well, that's no small potatoes, right? Considering the little operation that they've got going on. So maybe this wasn't so cruel by Ben Carson. After all, where's all this money going? Why was it slashed? Why was Ben Carson coming to their face and basically saying, you guys need to go to the private sector? Well, I just pointed out on the map, there's no infrastructure right there. And we know, and of course I'm no economist, but if you really want to get people off the street, and if you really want to help them, you need to give them jobs, and you need to attract wealth to their community. And this community has done nothing. This is a complete slum. And this center is sitting right in the middle of it. Undeveloped land with tons of tunnels underneath and all the other creepy stuff that we talked about. But they were asking for even more money. Now let me take you over to their site. Here comes another red flag. This logo right here. And I'm not going to go into the symbolism. You guys know I only usually touch on it because I want to get to the rest of the story. But this is another logo that just really, really creeps me out. And you'll notice that a lot of these humanitarian groups use this sort of outstretched hand thing or whatever. And it looks real nice. And it looks, look at all the diversity and all the hands or whatever. But what you're really seeing is a bunch of hands getting a hand out. You're not seeing them taking anything. You're not seeing anyone helping anybody up. You're not seeing anyone actually get anything done. You're just seeing a bunch of outstretched hands. Well, anyway, this is their community partners. And it looks like they get a lot of money. These are all their donors. And we're not going to go through them all. Karina Jackson, of course, is their CEO. She also, she donates. And I don't really think that that's really, I don't really want to look into her that much at this point. But they get a lot of coin. Christ Episcopal Church, Co-America Bank. You've got the Bike Share Corporation, Digitas, LBI. And DTE Energy, of course, is huge. Looks like a lot of different foundations and, of course, churches. And that's pretty normal. I don't necessarily think that this is all nefarious. But I do want to point out, there you go, MGM Grand Detroit, Motor City Casino, PNC Foundation, Quicken Loans. These are big donors. So this is the money in the private sector that Ben Carson seems to be talking about. And yet Mariners Inn wanted to spin this and make it look like Ben Carson was giving him the shaft. Now let me take you around the corner for perspective. We would have been right where my mouse was here. This is the Mariners Inn on your left. And in the background there, you can see the Masonic Temple. Over here on the right, this appears to be storage and parking for the Little Caesars Arena, which is on the back side of that. So I'm assuming storage for all their equipment and gear and whatnot, and probably a lot of parking garage and stuff like that too. But this is the Mariners Inn. Looks like to be one of the front or side entrances here. And I wanted to turn your attention to this odd mural here. Yikes. Well, thanks to an anon who actually walked by this the other day and took this for me. Much appreciated. Look at that. What is going on there? Yikes. Bunch of skulls. That must be like, this is the drug period of the time, I guess, and the road's all broken up. I'm not really sure. And then all of a sudden you get to this point where you stop with the weird Mariners logo with the ankh and the cross and the two pillars and the anchor and I don't know. And what's that in your hand? What's that in your hand? Put it down. Where'd you get that thing? Put it down. What are you doing? It looks like a human organ. What are you doing? So you stopped at the Mariners Inn, grabbed some organs, and now the trail lightens up and you can become a construction worker or an inmate with a lab coat. All thanks to the Monarch butterflies from MK Ultra. Nice and creepy. Thanks to the anon who got me that picture though. Okay, so thoroughly creepy mural on this supposed shelter for homeless people. Right now, of course, we can't necessarily blame the homeless people that are maybe frequenting these places. They may simply be in trouble, and I've kind of established that this whole area has a lot of homeless. It doesn't have much at all, not a ton of infrastructure, and of course there's wealth in the outside areas there, but this is sort of near where these homes were exploding. This is a ton of low-income housing, which of course has problem with drugs. They don't have enough businesses going there to keep them. That's really what ends up making a community safe, is when people start going there and visiting their restaurants and their cafes and their whatnot. That's what makes things safer, because then people have jobs. There's less want. You get the idea, right? But what this cries out to me is human trafficking. And indeed, this is a problem that Wayne County is having. This is from the New York Post from back in October 2018. 123 missing children found in Michigan during sex trafficking operation. Over 100 children were found safe during a one-day sweep by multiple Michigan law enforcement agencies, the U.S. Marshals Service said Wednesday. So, one day. And they were able to round up 123. The agency said Operation MIS Safe Kid recovered 123 missing children September 26 throughout Wayne County in a sweep aimed to identify and recover missing children and locate victims of sex trafficking. The operation had 301 case files for missing children opened before the sweep, which was the first of its kind in Wayne County. Okay, so we're not far off, are we? And we're talking about the very same neighborhood. All recovered children were interviewed by authorities about possibly being sexually victimized or used in a sex trafficking ring, and officials said 3 identified as possible sex trafficking cases. The report said one homeless teenage boy had not had anything to eat in 3 days, so authorities transported him back to their command post for food and turned him over to Child Protective Services for aftercare. Okay, so this was back in 2018, but you can see this is right in the same neighborhood, and it's got all the signs that we're talking about. And of course, we've got the Planned Parenthood nearby. We've got Perry's Funeral home nearby. We've got housing and urban development nearby. We've got the Mariners Inn nearby. We've got the Masonic Temple nearby. We've got all these tunnels nearby, and all of it seems to really fit, doesn't it? Now, let me take you back to the original site of the explosion, 14400 Evergreen Road. You can see just a couple miles away, looks like, according to Google, about 3.8 miles, is Rouge Park. And Rouge Park is an extremely large park, and this used to hold Nike Ajax missiles from back in the day. This would have been around the 1950s, and I believe the missiles were kind of down near the this part of the park here, and right around Joy Road. But this was back in the day, and evidently this was never fully demolished, and there are still missiles sitting there in their tubes with the warheads intact. So very interesting stuff from back in the day. I also want to point out that the Detroit Diesel Corporation is right next door. Well, back in the day, Rouge Park was the place to be, sort of like Central Park. You could go ice skating, you could probably go tobogganing, bring the whole family, enjoy a day, even stroll down Lover's Lane. They had a Lover's Lane there. Well, nowadays, Lover's Lane means something a little bit different, as it seems to be a place for rampant prostitution, drug use, crime, murder, and of course, human trafficking. And Evergreen's not only dealing with explosions, it looks like they're also dealing with some sinking roads, thanks to Hal the Palanon, who shared with me some of these screenshots. Yeah, indeed, some roads sinking, almost like there's something down below. Yikes. Well, guess what? Something else is also seeping out around that area. Hexavalent chromium. I'm not sure if that's hexavalent, I don't know. Chromium. Weird green slime pumping out of the street. And that was the chemical that was involved in the Aaron Brockovich case. If you're not familiar with the movie Aaron Brockovich, very famous case. Yeah, so here we've got this hexavalent chromium. Yikes. I wonder if the military uses that for missiles. Well, they do. In 2008, they told us. U.S. Army Aviation and Missile Command hexavalent chromium coatings replacement program. Okay, so here we've got this old missile base that supposedly still has some active stuff down below. Lots of tunnels nearby, lots of people getting sick in the area, lots of exploding homes and sinking roads, and the U.S. Army using hexavalent chromium. Now, some lesser known facts about this is that there were some farmhouses on this park. They're not really there anymore, but some of the remnants are there. And you can see some of the pictures leading kind of to the trail of these farmhouses. This is from Nailhead, who does some really good researching in the area here. But I found this very interesting because actually one of these was donated. It became an officers club and later a casino. And it looks like many funky things might have gone down here out in the middle of the woods, if you know what I mean. But this was actually donated to the city by Charles Sorensen. Charles Sorensen was sort of Henry Ford's right-hand man. Henry Ford and Sorensen being a couple of the most powerful men in the Detroit area. Henry Ford, of course, a 33rd degree Mason, and he was into all kinds of funky things. So I suppose if he was into funky things, he could get into funky things way out here in the middle of this farmhouse. But it was donated by this Charles Sorensen, and Sorensen himself is an interesting character. I'm not going to go way into him, but he does have a yacht sitting out there in the harbor named Helene. And of course, both of them were big parts of Rouge Steel, which made up a big part of Henry Ford's motor company. So lots of knuckleheadedry. It looks like it could have been going on in this park and still is today. Now, just to give you an idea of the people that we are dealing with here, this is a desk that was allegedly a gift to Mr. Sorensen from Joseph Stalin. And we do know that this was donated by Mrs. Sorensen to the Detroit Public Library. This is housed in the Burton collection. But the story goes is that this desk was gifted to Mr. Sorensen as a gift for helping Russia get themselves an auto industry inside the USA. And of course, that auto industry was Ford Motors. Couple more quick side notes on this area. It looks to be that the Boy and Girl Scouts had frequented some of these properties from back in the day. This is according to some documents from the Parks and Recreation Department. They also list another house here. This appears to be the lot of 14245 West Outer Drive. Was an old farmhouse, but it looks like for many years it was used as a crippled children's center. Oh, how about that? So Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, crippled kids, and really sketchy places out in the middle of nowhere. Sounds nice. So there you have it. It looks to me like not only is human trafficking a problem in this area now, but it may very well have been for a very long time. We see lots of Masonic connections, which may not be directly connected, but it seems to strongly suggest it, considering that their wealth is in the area, and yet we see tons and tons of poverty, tons of broken homes, tons of displaced youth, and of course tons of human trafficking. Now, I mentioned that we had 123 kids rescued in that previous operation, but let me just show you a clip of what the original number they were looking for was.
Numbers: more than 1,400 children are missing in Michigan tonight. About half are from Wayne County. Well, now there's a new sweep to find them and to determine if they are also victims of human trafficking. 7 Action News reporter Simon Chowdhury is in Wayne County with the story you'll see only here on 7.
When law enforcement officials deal with cases involving missing children, there's a lot of layers that have to be peeled back, a lot of questions that are being asked. Where have these kids been? Are they victims of other crimes? Well, answering those questions and finding those kids were the goal for today's sweeps.
So there you have it, boys and girls, and that is why we googly. So hopefully it will spark something in your imagination or something that you will remember about your own neighborhoods so that you can kind of look out and see what some of the warning signs might be. And of course, the end result is to hopefully protect our children. I want to leave you with one quick little interesting note. This all is going down in Wayne County. Of course, Wayne County was named after Mad Anthony Wayne, who was a general. And he had a lot of forts kind of spread throughout the United States. Of course, one of the most famous ones being Fort Wayne, Indiana, which the city is named after. But he was big in this area too. Now, he died actually of gout. He was heading from Detroit to Pennsylvania. He was treated by a Dr. Balfour, wink, wink, hint, hint, wink, wink. But he ended up dying of gout. But the interesting thing about his story is that some while after he died, they went ahead and opened his coffin, and they wanted to do some sort of autopsy or whatever, and they ended up seeing that his body was perfectly preserved, except for, of course, the foot that he lost due to the gout. So they were really, really intrigued by this, and of course did more studies, and they ended up kind of screwing it all up. They ended up boiling his body and essentially removing the meat from his bones. It was really, really creepy. And they ended up burying the meat, I guess, and the water part of it in one section, and moved his bones to another. And this, of course, enraged the Society of Cincinnati. And that's where we get into an even bigger story, which we won't cover today, but very, very fun stuff. But long story short, they ended up moving it back. The Society of Cincinnati built him a monument. And then, of course, I believe it was the original stockhouse where he was buried ended up getting blown up. So lots of hijinks went into Mad Anthony Wayne. But there is your story for today. All right, boys and girls, if you like this video, please click like, share, and subscribe. All my alternate links are down below. If you'd like to join one of those, please do. It'll be linked in the video description as well as the show links from today. All right, kids, this is Sir Patrick Mack. Till next time, stay funky.